This section did a really good job reminding us that the American Revolutionary War, like while it was famous for its battles and its generals and its heroic deeds and diplomatic missions, it was a war that impacted everyone. And this war impacted the women and the children, right? So while we're going to learn about the Battle of Saratoga and the diplomatic mission of Ben Franklin and Benedict Arnold's betrayal from 1775 all the way until the war's end in 1783, this war is impacting literally everyone. And sometimes the stories of the women and the children don't always get told. So it's important to remember that. Again, over this 8-year period, it is, as our text calls it, a people's war, and the people's war impacts everyone. So first, it tells us of four really cool stories of women who actually defied the stereotypical roles of the day and actually took part in the fighting themselves. Molly Hayes followed her husband, and when her husband was killed, she actually decided to take up the task of firing the cannons with the soldiers. Margaret Corbin, who also helped her husband fire a cannon, but she's famous for allegedly bringing water to the soldiers on the battlefield, many of whom were suffering from heat exhaustion. She becomes famously known as Molly Pitcher. Deborah Sampson disguised herself as a man. No one knew it. Fought for like 3 years. Later on was wounded. A doctor was caring for her, and the doctor's niece wanted to marry the handsome soldier, but then the doctor had to reveal that Deborah was in fact a woman. But she was so revered that later on she went on a speaking tour. Imagine the stories that she would be able to tell of a woman fighting along men for 3 years. Like, that's the definition of the movie Milan, right? And then Anna Marie Lane also fought alongside her husband for several years. She disguised herself, and then later on, she was also wounded. They found out that she was a woman, but she actually received a military pension. So she got paid to fight, which is really neat. The central idea then of this text story was the idea that many of the tasks that had traditionally been done only by the men were now then suddenly thrust upon the women and the children, right? There were huge numbers of men who were now fighting in the army, either for the Americans or the British. And then all of a sudden, all of the tasks, all of the things that they had been doing before were now suddenly having to be done by women and children. There's no job training. It's all the men are gone. Now you have to till the fields. You have to tend to the livestock. You have to go run the blacksmith. You have to do all of the things that women and children hadn't typically done. We see this frequently in wars, especially in World War II, when high numbers of men were gone. Women broke down stereotypes and took up jobs that weren't traditionally reserved for them. Many women also followed the army and performed tasks vital to its needs. So again, while we're going to learn about, the famous military maneuver at the Battle of Yorktown, there's so much that goes on behind the scenes: the cooking, the cleaning, the sewing. So many women took up those tasks. Many women, like everyone, did not escape the terrors of the war. These wars were fought amongst the homes of the colonists, of the Americans, and for children too. These tasks also were done by children. Again, they did not escape the terrors of the war. And many children would make ammunition for both sides. It was a very common task to make the musket balls. It could be done quite simply, and women often performed that task. It then concludes with three more stories of some really important women. Mercy Otis Warren, often considered America's first playwright, of author, wrote plays criticizing the British. One of them was called The Blockheads. It was a stereotypical satire that made fun of British soldiers. My handwriting is bad with this thing, sorry. Which is it's a neat story. People would read it and laugh. You had Phyllis Wheatley, who was 7 when she was a slave. She eventually earned her freedom, but she wrote many beautiful poems praising George Washington, the leader of the Continental Army, a slave owner himself. Really interesting, but her writing was absolutely beautiful. And then Abigale Adams, the wife of John Adams, was very famous for always telling her husband that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, all of these things, they are only applying to half of all Americans. It completely excludes women. Women don't have the right in most instances to own property or to vote or to do the things that they want to do. And then she also tells John Adams that it's actually fewer than one half, because we are denying these rights to African Americans. We are holding them in bondage. So she constantly reminds John Adams and anyone that will listen that this beautiful task of creating America is a great idea, but there's still so much more to do.